Welcome back to This Landscape. I'm Jerry with Hilgersom Landscape Centre. On today's episode, we're going to be putting the final touches on this landscape, focusing on things like the planting material, some paving stone lawn edging, as well as some landscape fabric and gravel, boulders, and a little bit of mulch. So enjoy it. So lots of progress being made here at this landscape that we're doing. Planting material is going in. Next step after planting material is the ground cover around it. In this landscape, we're going to be using both cedar mulch as well as an aggregate ground cover. Whenever we do an aggregate ground cover, we like to put a landscape fabric down. Now, landscape fabric, a bit of a contentious issue with gardeners. If you're putting the landscape fabric too tight around the plants, it can cause damage. If you're doing it right, and if you're using a professional product, I think it'll be fine. One thing to remember, putting landscape fabric around the plant, don't go too tight. Right now, this is too tight. We wouldn't be able to leave it like this. We want to have a nice big star around our trees and bushes. And all we're doing is just allowing for future growth of the plant. You know, you can fold back this landscape fabric, get it out of the way. We don't want it right up against the base of the shrubs and trees because it could promote rot there. So just fold it back a little bit. And it also, with these slits in it, as the bush grows, it's not going to be constricted by the landscape fabric. Once that's in, it's just a matter of putting a aggregate of your choice on top. In this case, we wanted to kind of complement the brick and the house colors. So we're using this brown rock, crushed rock called Shuswap Brown. We're just gonna be putting a thin layer, about 2.5 inches on top, just enough to cover all the landscape fabric that you don't see the cloth beneath it. If you go too thick, it could cause problems with your plants later, so make sure you watch out for that. The quality of landscape fabric makes a big difference. You can see this one is a woven material. It's a professional landscape fabric. If you're using plastic, that's when you're gonna get a lot of problems. Plastic doesn't let the water through, it doesn't let air through, and it'll really make your soil awful, and the plants will not do very well. Landscape fabric, on the other hand, it will let water through as well as air. Quality makes a big difference. You can get really thin stuff that's as thin as paper, but if you start walking in it, you're gonna be starting to punch holes in it, and as a result, weeds can get through. So this is the good stuff. You'll feel no problem to be walking in here later, and everything will turn out very well. Another thing to keep in mind is landscape fabric will not prevent weeds from coming at all, okay? Some people think that just because you put the landscape fabric down, you're never gonna have a problem with a weed again. Oftentimes what will happen is that the wind is gonna be blowing in silt, and along with the silt comes weed seeds, and the weed seeds will just situate themselves on top of the landscape fabric, and the weeds will actually grow above the landscape fabric. So although the landscape fabric is great for stopping weeds below from emerging, unfortunately, and especially in our southern Alberta windy climate, it's not going to prevent weeds from coming at all. Landscape fabric, pretty straightforward, but there's a couple things you may want to keep in mind when you're installing it. One thing is, you can see Landon here is putting it over the edge. We're not just strictly going to the edge, we're actually wrapping it around to come up a little bit. That'll just make sure that there is no weeds coming in that corner. And the other thing is to, as you're placing it, put some aggregate on the edges. That way the landscape fabric can't move. And then once that's all done, that's when you can start adding the majority of your landscape aggregate. Lawn edging is a very common thing you'll see in many landscapes. Many different forms. It can be a plastic edging, wood edgings, or in this case, a brick edging or a paving stone edging. There are certain brick edgings available that are made for a lawn edging. They're a little bit thicker. They'll situate themselves into the soil and be a little bit more stable. But really, any type of paving stone can be used as a lawn edging. Some, though, will require a bit of a plastic edging support or edging restraint to keep them in place. Most situations, even though in our landscape this is going to be artificial turf over here on this side, normally speaking, if this is just lawn, the lawn side of most edgings with the matted roots of the lawn, the bricks aren't going to be really shifting, so no edging is really necessary on this side. On this side, though, there's going to be, in this situation, there's going to be some aggregate, some landscape aggregate, but if there's cedar mulch or whatever, there's not much support offered by the mulch or the aggregate. So as a result, we need some kind of plastic edging just to hold it in place. And in this situation, we did a beast edging, just a type of plastic edging you can buy at our landscape center. We spiked it in underneath, and then we just laid the brick over top. That way, it's not going to be seen, but it's also going to give that support that it needs. So in landscaping, there's many different forms of irrigation. Of course, you see the pop-up sprinklers in lawns. We're using two different types of planting bed irrigation in this project. This one here in the aggregate beds, we're actually going to be putting a drip line. And drip line is just a nice even way to water your planting beds without having overspray or anything like that. It's a good way to irrigate if you're not really changing your planting very often, like as in adding new plants and things like that. So this is a great way to do that. This is going to be later on a planting bed with cedar mulch in it, and the customer wants an area where, you know, she can over the years change the plantings and things like that. So the irrigation system has to fit the adaptability, like it has to change with the amount of planting materials. So we're using a different system here. It's using micro irrigation lines, so just very small water lines that are connected to these manifolds, these micro manifolds that are coming out of the ground. And essentially, it's a really slick and easy system. All you're going to be doing is taking a piece of this micro tube, however long you may need. I'll just do this to demonstrate what it's going to look like when it actually has the planting in it. And just a matter of cutting it to length. This is a shrubler. Shrubler, it just kind of emits the amount of water that you need. You can close it and open it to give you more or less water. And a matter of connecting it like that and then putting it next to a plant. And now each individual plant will have its own waterer, and it's very easy to change. One little tip about placing boulders, you definitely want to settle them into the landscape a little bit. Having them sit just strictly on top looks very artificial, unnatural. So when we're placing boulders, you just want to simply clear away a little bit of the gravel. That way the boulder sitting directly on the ground, and you can replace the gravel around them, and it looks a little more natural that way. And same goes with when we're placing these smaller rocks. If you just do a simple stomp, settling them into the other gravel beneath, it just makes it look that much better and professional when it's all said and done. When deciding what type of ground cover to put on your planting beds, a few things to consider. What are you planning to do in that planting bed? Are you planning to add and change the plantings in there over the course of the years? If you are, definitely go with mulch. Mulch in this bed here, for example, our customer, she wants to be able to add different plantings on her own over the course of the years, maybe some bulbs, some spring flowering bulbs. Mulch is the only way to go in that case because it is very simple to add some plants. Just a matter of moving the mulch away, and beneath the mulch we have our soil is right there, you know, so it's going to be easy to do. And then when you're finished planting, simply putting the mulch back in and away you go. Another thing to consider is the final look that you want to go for. Mulch being an organic material, is a lot softer. It kind of softens the landscape. Aggregate, on the other hand, is a little harsher. It doesn't give you that softness, but you know, perhaps you don't need that in your landscape. We wanted a balance with a little bit of both. Have the aggregate and have the mulched areas, just to complement each other and to really give our customer what they want and what they intend to do with the landscape over the years. Obviously, in the areas where you're going to be putting aggregate, the planting choices are a little bit more permanent, because it is a little harder to add a plant in the future, because now you're going to be dealing with moving aggregate and as well as cutting the landscape fabric. And anytime you're doing that, there's always a potential to get soil raised into the gravel above, which could cause weeds in the future. So just little things to keep in mind when you're planting your landscape. An easy way to add some interest into your planting beds is to add different textures and different sizes of aggregate in this case. Of course, the plants are going to become the stars of the show as they mature. But right now, being new plants, you know, we wanted to give a little bit of interest in these planting beds. We had this crushed rock in the majority of the areas. We just added some of the round rock in a little larger size. It's kind of the same tones though, just to kind of keep things unified, but give it a little bit of more texture and a little more interest. Simply just no rhyme or reason, just kind of adding it randomly in there will give it a really nice look. And additionally, adding boulders is a great way to give some dimension to your yard as well. Boulders, of course, come in lots of different shapes and sizes. These are fieldstone boulders, mostly round and kind of in the beige gray tones, but you can get the mountain boulders, the big jagged ones as well. All they do, I mean, they look pretty in your landscape beds. You don't have to wait for them to grow. They'll give you some interest immediately. And then especially with our landscape lighting, it'll cast some shadows and really look interesting in that way too. One informal rule, I guess, is to put them in odd numbers. That's often done in landscaping, whether it's planting or in this case, boulders. Just somehow having odd numbers, you know, 3, 5 boulders kind of together is going to be a little more aesthetically pleasing as having, you know, just a couple of boulders instead. If you want to get some sense of a formal look where you need some symmetry, then of course, yes, you balancing with equal amounts is preferable. Again, thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something about landscaping. Stay tuned. Next episode is going to be the one that you don't want to miss. It's going to be the one where everything comes together and we show you the final product at this beautiful Victoria Park project. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.